Welcome back to all of you who are following us online across the African continent and elsewhere. We're truly delighted to have you for this second decision of the AI Africa Week 2025 in parallel to the AI Summit being held in Paris. This event is hosted by the Orange Digital Center, which operates in 16 countries in the EMEA region. Others also benefit, as do 300 startups. This event is part of a broader framework in which we can witness the impact of AI on our day-to-day work. And to date, there are more than 30,000 attendants who have registered, which really reflects your interest in these subjects. This morning, we talked a lot about AI and its impact on development, how it can have impact on various sectors, on Orange, on stakeholders, on partners. We also extensively discussed our responsibility as a telco, and both in terms of sustainable development and other challenges that remain key. AI is going to be a game changer, but Orange, as a responsible player, has taken a certain number of commitments to support the development of AI. Let me just remind you that this conference is being held both in French and in English with simultaneous interpretation, so pick your language. Let us now kick off this afternoon sequence with a panel discussion about AI and ethics. AI and ethics are a super important issue for Orange, as we're about to see. And without further ado, I'm inviting Emilie Servent to come up. Hello, Emilie. Hello, Youssoupha. Hi, everyone. So, as I said earlier, this morning we were with Steve and Bolot, and we talked about the impact of AI, its impact on our various business lines. With Faisal, we discussed the impact of AI on our business. We talked about the definition of AI. We talked about approaches of AI and how they could integrate, how we could handle its limitations. Nathalie also told us extensively about sustainable development, and we're together going to talk about AI and ethics. We can clearly see today that AI is a true revolution, reflected in a number of time savings, improvements in operational efficiency. How can we integrate an improved customer experience? But there's also an impact on our employees. But beyond these positive impacts, there are also a number of issues which may be problematic, among which the ethical aspects. So the first question I have for you, what are the challenges of AI, and how is Orange including this in its broader strategic plan? Well, indeed, there have been warning signals about AI and about the ethics and the use of this technology in terms of risks, of course. There's risks in terms of transparency, the complexity of the technology, understanding how it actually works. It needs to be made easier to explain. There's also a risk of loss of human control. We can see that the agents are becoming increasingly autonomous. We need to make sure that it's kept on track. It also needs to be kept robust over time. There's the use of data, the use of personal data that really must be protected. There are challenges in terms of data quality too. If the data input is bad, the system will lose track over time.
On a aussi les enjeux autour de la sécurité, parce qu'il peut y avoir aussi des
There are also digital security challenges.
de malveillance, de mésusage des technologies.
There can be misuse of technologies.
Technologies de reconnaissance faciale qui ont
facial recognition, for
Il y a
instance,
aussi le sujet des biais et de l'inclusion.
can be used.
Ça,
And then there's the whole issue of biases and inclusion.
La discrimination sociale qui est amplifiée avec l'IA.
There's social discrimination that AI can amplify.
Entre les personnes vulnérables. Donc,
There's a rift that may deepen, widen. There needs to be a representativity
Voilà, ça c'est le grand sujet
of the persons that are targeted by AI. And then, of course, there are social and environmental challenges. Now, Nathalie talked about it this morning. So, when using AI, you need to really question whether or not it's the best solution available. So, Orange is well aware of all of these difficulties and challenges and has really integrated it into its strategy. We were aware of the risks very early on. So with ethical and responsible aspects in mind, we created an advisory board, a group of international experts from all walks of life. We created and drafted an ethical charter in terms of the use and development of AI. And the charter applies to every country in the group. It's universal. It's true that in Europe, everything is highly regulated already, but our charter adapts to everyone, to all of our AI systems. And it even goes beyond what is made mandatory by environmental regulation in Europe. And it's really integrated as part of our vision of AI in Orange. And it also needs to stick to our purpose and our mission as a business. So, in addition to that vision, we have also applied it in terms of governance locally. There are ethics contact points all over. We have a number of data champions across Africa who've been trained in matters of ethical AI. We also have projects examining robustness, risks of discrimination, and then we work in very concrete terms. We try to provide people with methods and tools. And then, of course, training and education are hugely important. We need to raise awareness of all employees, but also of the stakeholders, the other stakeholders. That's the action plan at Orange, to make sure there's responsible use of technology, both for our employees and customers. Thanks, Emilie. We can really see that Orange is really taking these ethical aspects into account with governance, with organization. Another important element is that in order to preserve openness to other partners who can come along and challenge us. If we look at the African continent more specifically, what would you say is specific to this area? Well, it's a question that we've had. Of course, we do have a significant presence, a footprint in Africa. What makes Africa specific? We looked at research conducted. We organized focus groups with the local population in 3 countries, Kenya, Côte d'Ivoire, and Madagascar, to try to really understand how people use AI, what questions people have. And the key takeaways are that the ethical challenges are the same for everyone. But then there's the manner in which people use AI that varies. In Africa, it's really going to be at the service of the communities. not necessarily the same as in Europe.
La perception du risque.
And then there's also the perception of risk. Africa has a very young population that understands the benefits of AI much more than the risks. So there's a difference in appreciation and a much greater driver. There's a much greater drive to go and test and try, well, rather than think about the risks.
Après, donc je l'ai dit, il y a une vision
And then,
utilitariste, pragmatique de l'usage de
much
l'intelligence
more
artificielle.
pragmatic and utilitarian approach.
Qui sont encore plus
There are
qui sont
risks
amplifiés en Afrique. Il y a
that
tous les
are
sujets
amplified in
d'inclusion,
Africa.
liés aussi à la maturité
There's inclusion,
de la population en termes d'usage de
the
l'IA,
maturity
de formation,
of the population in terms of AI usages.
les technologies qui sont
There needs to be more education
développées, je veux dire, dans les
and technologies that are being developed
elles vont pas bien
in
marcher
other areas that apply to Africa are not necessarily suitable to their needs. And these are problems that do exist and which in future will need to be corrected. I would say that, in short, a responsible AI in Africa is an AI for all Africans, produced by Africans with African data. As you just said, we are facing real problems with inclusion, with training and education, which remains a challenge in Africa. You said that we need to have an approach to put things in context, to work on hot topics in Africa, and to work with people who understand the implications. Could you tell us a little bit more, perhaps give us some concrete examples about AI and Africa? Of course, there's a great diversity of languages too in Africa, a lot of spoken languages with not much data that's available. Our scientists at Orange are working a lot to create customer relation voice solutions in the local languages, in Wolof in Senegal, but there are plenty of other languages across Africa. And Orange is really working hard, because that serves the purpose of inclusion. There's perhaps a lack of digitalization in Africa, but the work on infrastructure can help the population to gain greater access to AI technologies and to use it in a way that makes sense for them. And then, in terms of use cases, Orange is working a lot in the field of agriculture. And the difficult thing here is obtaining data. There are satellites that provide loads of useful data that could complement the lack of data from the ground. And all of this can help to support and facilitate the value chains, develop agriculture and the local economy. And then, to return to ethics, if you look at interfaces, things need to be explained better. If you look at banking scores, for instance, for loans, you can explain how the algorithm works, what is the best way to use it. There are plenty of little things. And then security, data protection. Orange is doing lots of stuff. I'm sure that you're going to talk about cybersecurity later on. So there's a whole set of initiatives to help things move forward. Thank you, Emilie. It's true that if you think of inclusion, if you think about mobile money, diversification of financial services, which are more based on loans, on insurance, for these elements, there's an important part that we can play for added transparency and visibility. And you were talking about research. We conducted research where there is a sense that people are quite apprehensive. Where does all of this data come from? These are topics that are quite hot topics and require more ethics. Again, in the context of Africa, there is a diversity of solutions. Countries don't necessarily have the same level of maturity in terms of infrastructure or data availability or even of regulation. How would you say that the ethical AI approach could have an impact on Africa in all of its diversity? Yeah, of course, Africa is a whole lot of very, very different countries, and we must always work locally. There's a local context, local history. In Africa, each country is developing its own AI strategy with its own priority uses. There are different levels of maturity. There's the economy too. I could give you the example of Kenya, which is quite advanced in the field of AI. There was an education plan for the general population. There are a lot of people in Africa who contribute to AI, but AI that is often developed elsewhere. There's the use of AI in call centers in Africa. Generative AI specifically, and there are a lot of very concrete practical uses that are growing, and ethical AI needs to be factored in. And in terms of regulation, one can also say that regulation is moving in Africa on personal information, on data. There's greater maturity now across the continent. In terms of regulation of AI, there is less maturity because it's a brand new phenomenon. But things are moving. And what one can say is that regulation probably won't take on the same form as in Europe. It'll be more soft regulation, which leaves a lot of room for innovation. So you need to find the balance between a kind of framework and innovation. Thank you, Emilie. It's true that today, when you look at a few practical aspects of Orange's footprint, we fuel our chatbots with a lot of AI, with assisted AI. You were talking about the partnership with OpenAI and Meta on local languages, and that helps us to support our ecosystem and our customers. And that is going to be a real game changer, because we're talking a lot about inclusion. And I think that this ability to handle local languages is going to be hugely inclusive. So beyond the connectivity, which is our core business, both mobile networks and landlines with 4G coverage rates that are very high, the challenges we have in remote, rural areas with connectivity solutions, but they're not just that, because even with multi-service solutions, notably Orange Money for financial services, with Orange Energy for electrification, the rate of electrification is relatively low in Africa, of course. So there are a great many initiatives to help to facilitate interaction with our customers, and I believe that the emergence of regulation could help us to benefit from a framework where we could work in the best interests of our customers and contribute to the broader ecosystem, including our partners. The Orange Digital Center, there are a lot of startups that we're supporting. Absolutely, the ecosystem is very important because AI is not just a standalone thing. There's a whole chain of players who are involved. And of course, with the Orange Digital Center, we can educate the population, as many people as possible, in the field of AI and digital jobs to try and develop the talent pool locally. There are a lot of challenges, competitions organized by Orange to contribute to the emergence of the ecosystem. It's really important to try to make sure that as many things as possible happen locally in Paris. I'd say that currently there are actually thousands of people who are online who are following this event because they're really interested. And there's a question that we're getting a lot. What is the place that Africa holds in global governance? Yes, unfortunately, Africa is quite underrepresented. The UN, of course, is trying to have a global ethical approach, and there are a lot of African countries represented there. The AI Action Summit in Paris has just ended. There was a strong determination for all countries to participate and protect them against the negative impacts of AI. So we need to build on that because the situation is that there's a bit of an imbalance there, and a lot of people want to fix that. So things should be making progress in future. But a lot of things are being done to include and have a better representation of Africa while there are underrepresented areas. There are networks, there are global coalitions that are being created, AI in work, AI in the environment, AI in biases and inclusion. There are plenty of initiatives that aim to include everyone. But then, of course, locally, there needs to be more awareness, which is why information is key. And I believe that today's event is an interesting contribution to that, because it shines light on the challenges and the need that we have to act. Everyone can do something.
La conférence d'aujourd'hui reste quand même une preuve concrète dans cette logique de sensibilisation.
Today's conference is part of that sensitization. We talked about the important role we can play with our networks in the Orange Digital Center, how to raise awareness, how to support. We've started having discussions that are quite advanced with certain governments and institutions. So here, we're working a lot in awareness raising. I think the challenge is we can be a real game changer for Africa. We saw this earlier this morning in sectors such as agriculture, health, education, addressing these topics and taking this as far as possible, pushing awareness, onboarding governments, and this could really be positive for us. And we are trying to show that training is a real social aspect. It's not just technical performance. It's about having confidence to launch into entrepreneurship, for instance. So there are lots of virtues. It's a real topic here for us, and I think that Orange has a great procedure that we've got underway. We've got a tremendous local impact. Thank you so much for that, Emilie. Really important points that you've raised there. If you had something to sum up this session, what would be the major points that you want people to take away from our session here? Well, I'd say you have to be aware of the risks in artificial intelligence. There are a lot of questions regarding efficiency and effectiveness, but there are also the benefits. And you need to stress this. You have to be aware of what you're doing, aware of the choices you're making, but there are lots of opportunities for Africa. We need to think about that. You need to be vigilant regarding inclusion. So I think there's a lot of hope behind all of this, and Orange is really present to support and make sure things go well. Thank you. That's right. We do see that this is an opportunity. We've heard that a lot this morning. and the AI opportunities and the positive impacts that we've observed needs to be framed. We need to support. We need to take on the ethics issues. And as Emilie said, AI can help us a lot to go a lot further and accelerate the benefits for AI and Gen AI. For those online, there are thousands of folks out there online with us and are following us in Africa and elsewhere since this morning. We are now going to move on to the Q&A session. We've received a lot of questions. We've got over 30,000 people signed up, so we can't take all of the questions here. I'm going to ask a couple here and get Emilie's clarifications. And how can we guarantee that AI continues to represent and respect African values? That's what we were talking about. We do a lot of research there. Questions come in, and the way we treat them, well, as regards to the African values, we've seen related to the Ubuntu philosophy, it's the collective, which is more important than, say, the individualism that you might have in Europe or in Western countries. So, and respecting one's elders is also something that's lacking in the Western societies. But it will be the way that AI is used that's going to be different. The way it's developed will be different as well. But what's really important is developing local solutions that really fit with the values and the way that the societies are organized. It's the way we test AI. There are lots of solutions that are, plug and play, and they don't work in Africa. So that's why it's really important to develop AI solutions in Africa that represent the languages and local cultures and get the training there to develop systems that fit with the needs and training the people. Okay, we see this in the topics that we were talking about already. Local languages, it's important to have real local cultures, and because a word can be translated differently in the local context. So it's also important to drive AI that respects the values of these different countries. That's an important point. Because earlier we said there's a boulevard around generative AI and AI, but you have to be able to use it, leverage it, and it has to be in line with our values and with the regulatory constraints that are not intrinsic in Africa, but we need to use this to leverage development and make sure that we take into account the cultural aspects. Second question then. What are the ethical stop gates that need to be implemented so that we have inclusive AI that reduces inequalities? Well, I mentioned that earlier. There's a risk of inequality growing with artificial intelligence. The thing is, we need a global approach. At all levels, there have to be important actions taken. Even defining the use cases we're working on, you have the people, targets, we target them, that decides whether or not they're included, a broader public or a more specific public. We can find better solutions that work for them. And so when we define the use cases, when we determine the data we're using, we need to have representation, working on data in local languages, and the content. Orange is working really hard to make sure we have labeled data. There are a lot of data scientists in Africa working jointly to help create these data sets and share those with our research people, because that represents value for Africa. And then training the local population so that they're aware of the risks, that things can slide out of control if not controlled, and then using it properly. Because inclusion criteria can be related to the use and the use cases. If someone doesn't understand how it works, whatever. Well, we want to avoid risks, so it's an overall general approach that we have at Orange we have a label, PZI, which represents our commitment in AI. We have external auditors that come in and check us out every 2 years. So it's an overall procedure. I would say that's what we're trying to drive also outside the company. Well, thank you, Emilie, with this point on reducing inequalities. Now, next question, how can we use AI to reappropriate our history? Wow, well, history is culture locally, and to reappropriate history, it's digitalizing and keeping the traces, keeping the physical proof of history. So it's all coming down to data, though. Trying to get your data, I talked about respecting elders. So being able to get all the history that's in people's minds. That's one of the issues with AI and digitalization in general. Orange is involved in museums to keep traces of this history and to leverage it. Because what's interesting in history is learning lessons to build for the future. And artificial intelligence is always being nourished by the past, right? Traces from the past. So making ethical and sustainable AI means also orientating it in a sustainable direction and what's desirable, as opposed to just plugging in histories, say, from elsewhere, from the Western world that doesn't fit with what you want to do. Thank you for that, Emilie. We do see the importance of including ethics in AI that will enable us to set up a framework. As we heard this morning, there are true opportunities around AI. And where we're very lucky is getting ahead of the game, starting before others. Perhaps we can move forward and trial out a lot of things before we move it to scale, so we can develop some real convictions. And so this morning's session also shows that with customer experience and network and operational efficiency, generally speaking, these are topics that can take us very, very far and have massive impact. But it's really important upstream and from the very beginning to include ethics and sustainability in our development. So which will represent the greatest number of benefits, but it has to be ethical, it has to be responsible, sustainable. And as Emilie said, training is a very important part of this. And today we have the possibility to leverage Orange's digital center network and lots of local initiatives to continue to impact the ecosystem and contribute to a greater impact, a more powerful impact. Maybe a last question. Emilie, let's get your opinion. Was Orange beyond our internal training for our teams? You talked about data experts and the transfer of skills and knowledge. What about the transfer of the skills and knowledge outside of Orange in terms of training? I think that's an area for development for us. We have so much training in Orange. Making this available to our stakeholders does make sense for them to participate in the ecosystem, of course. I think that's going to be coming out soon. We're already doing this for Europe because there's a legal requirement in Europe to make sure that we control these connections. So definitely, I also wanted to call back to mind that ethics, the questions, and we're making choices in our design and usage. That's one point that I don't think I've made yet, but we have choices as to how we develop, why we use artificial intelligence here or there, or where we develop it and how we're going to use it. And we realize that everyone has a responsibility So that's ethics as well. Asking the questions, looking at the choices you make and making those decisions and then being responsible for them afterwards. Each time we have to look at it locally, the local context, the people we're targeting, and we can do things differently. There are different ways of implementing artificial intelligence. And at Orange, what we want is to provide the keys to our stakeholders so that they take the technology on board in the most desirable way. Thank you very much for that, Emilie. That's right. The goal is to give the keys to our ecosystems so that everyone can use them in AI and ethical AI. Thank you again for your brilliant talk that clarified many things on this topic that is of great interest for our community, and this will help us to keep moving. And as you said in your conclusion, it's an opportunity to share knowledge across the ecosystem and make sure that we have a proper usage and that we have a positive impact, of course. And so taking things on board very early on regarding ethics. Thank you again, Emilie. Thank you, Youssoupha. Thank you for inviting me here. It's been a great day.